Over the last year, nearly 200 busloads of migrants have arrived here in Washington, D.C. Those buses come from Texas and Arizona, paid for by officials who are upset with the Biden administration's border policy. But the nation's capital city now faces a predicament as resources dwindle and buses just continue to pull up. Benji Heyer explains.
Javier Castillo-Pinto arrived in the United States in May after a months-long arduous journey through Central America. The 41-year-old left his family behind in Venezuela in search of a better life for him and his children. But having made it across the US-Mexico border and all the way to Washington, D.C., life since has been far from easy.
Mi sentimiento estando aquí en los Estados Unidos, lejos de mi familia.
My feelings, being here in the United States, away from my family, are on the floor. I have 3 kids and my wife in Venezuela. I've had 20 years of marriage, and we've never been separated until now. It was a very difficult decision.
Muy dura tomarla en Venezuela, venirme a Estados Unidos y dejar a mi familia.
Javier's been living for weeks in what he describes as a bug-ridden and overflowing homeless shelter. Yet he doesn't have the money to leave. Without asylum status, he can't legally work.
That, in a sense, is the crux of the challenge. Without a job, thousands of migrants are having to rely on housing and healthcare paid for by the district in order to survive. They're living in limbo, unable to sustain themselves, and it's costing the government millions.
Since its creation last year, Washington's Office of Migrant Services has spent more than $15 million on lodging, food and other aid, according to the Department of Human Services. This Days Inn is one of the hotels under contract, closed to the public, packed full of migrants. The DC Council is seeking federal reimbursement to foot the bill. But that emergency cash only covers 30 days of temporary housing. Many stay for much longer. And new rules at the southern border aimed at dissuading unlawful entry haven't deterred thousands more asylum seekers. A surge there might see expenses here climb to over $50 million by the end of the summer. For non-profits like SAMU, in part funded by the state, it's crucial that financial constraints don't hinder the ability to offer humanitarian support.
The people are still coming. They have always come in different numbers. We are prepared and ready to meet their needs no matter how many we have. You know, if there's 100 today and 5 tomorrow, we're still going to be here. We're still going to be providing the same side, the same kind of care, which is, you know, focused on respect and dignity and treating people like we think that they should be treated. So for us, influxes, changes, none of that stuff really matters. We are here and we're prepared no matter what happens.
No elegí Washington. Digamos que Washington me eligió a mí.
That will come as a relief to Javier. I didn't choose Washington, he tells us. Washington chose me. He remains optimistic. Yet the burden of proof to be granted asylum is high. The cost to house migrants is spiraling. If his claim is denied, he could be deported. An American dream turned nightmare. Benji Heyer, CGTN, Washington, D.C.
And picking up on that, that nightmare is set to get worse, especially in the U.S. state of Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis is tightening rules that will force undocumented migrants out of the state. As Nitza Soledad Perez reports, the move is being seen as a hardline immigration policy the governor could pursue.
It's been a week of protests in Florida. Immigrants, their families, and others who support them took to the streets in Homestead, Fort Myers, Tallahassee, and West Palm Beach in protest of a new immigration law that went into effect on Saturday. The controversial law imposes penalties on Florida businesses with 25 or more employees that choose not to use E-Verify, a federal database system to check the legal status of their workers. It makes it a felony for anyone to knowingly transport an undocumented worker into the state. Hospitals that accept government health insurance are now required to ask patients for immigration status before they're admitted for care. And out-of-state driver's licenses legally obtained by undocumented migrants will no longer be accepted in Florida.
I was a teacher for a long time, for 4 years, and I worked in this community specifically. I had a lot of students who were undocumented, and I know will be suffering the consequences of this new law that's passed. Also, you know, parents, family members that I have, they can't be here, so we're here for them.
I'm Puerto Rican, I have citizenship, but I'm here to support the community of Homestead because I have seen how Homestead has grown agriculturally, construction-wise, and it's important that immigrants stay here because we need their labor.
Immigrant community members tell CGTN that the new law has prompted many undocumented immigrants to flee the state, negatively impacting businesses that have historically relied on immigrant labor. Immigrant leaders from other states have joined the movement. Angelica Villalobos traveled to Florida from Oklahoma to protest.
Oklahoma had its share of anti-immigrant laws in 2006 through 2008, and it's horrible. It's because they actually realized a few years after it passed how damaging it was for the state. I think that Florida it went into the same path, but they soon will realize that they made a big mistake.
California is also hosting its own rallies in support of Florida's migrant community. The Florida governor has taken a hard line on illegal immigration as he campaigns for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, promising to finish a U.S.-Mexico border wall and even calling for an end to birthright citizenship.
Advocacy groups announced that they will be filing a federal lawsuit against Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, challenging the legality of SB 1718. They argue that this new law violates fundamental rights of the people of Florida and undermines the cultural and economic contributions of immigrants.
Supporters of the new law say that it will help people that are in state legally and deter illegal migration. Meantime, more protests and walkouts by groups opposed to the measure are expected to happen in Florida in the coming weeks. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Well, the share of foreign-born workers in the United States labor force hit a record high last year to almost 30 million. That's up from about 28 million the year before, a jump of 6%. Now, in comparison, the number of native-born workers rose barely 1%. The difference, a bigger share of the immigrant population is of working age. Immigrants make up about 13.5% of the U.S. population, a figure that has not changed for 20 years. Despite labor shortages, politicians are divided over the need to attract international or foreign workers. And as we just mentioned in our previous report, a new immigration law just went into effect that targets undocumented migrants in the state of Florida. As a result, there are already reports of migrant workers abandoning fields as well as construction projects. This is a big issue we're going to be hearing a lot about throughout this summer. For more on immigration and its economic impact, we're joined by Rafael Bernal, staff writer at The Hill. Rafael, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
I want to get right to it. Let's talk about Florida's new law and Governor DeSantis, his strategy regarding migrants. How do you think this is being digested, not just to people here in the United States, but internationally? How are people looking at the way the United States is handling migrant workers in the South, in Texas, in California, in the state of Florida?
Well, some countries are positively baffled. You have countries like Canada that are reforming their immigration system to bring in more talent, to bring in more laborers. Right now that there are all these slots to be filled by laborers, bringing in more human capital makes sense for those countries. There are countries that are very angered, like Mexico, because they see this as an opening to treat many Mexican citizens with violating their human rights.
Sure.
Now, there's also a huge political angle. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador does not like Governor DeSantis. He's been an ally of former President Trump. And the political angle for Governor DeSantis is he knows that in a Republican presidential primary, the only way to beat former President Trump is on the right really reclaiming Trump's base. It is a massive challenge, but these policies follow that political reality.
You know, Rafael, I think you touched on something very important. It's not just the human rights, however, that I think a lot of people are very upset the way this is being portrayed, but just people being treated as second-class citizens. And for generations, the United States has turned to migrant workers to work in the fields. This is hot dirty work that a lot of people in the United States simply won't do, no matter how much you pay them. And as we heard in that report, we're now seeing migrants walk off the job in a number of agricultural fields as well as construction sites. And certainly you'd think it'd have an effect on the service industry in Florida, where tourism is such a huge percentage of the income generated there.
That's right. The industries most affected are the industries that use more migrant labor. And when we talk about migrant labor, we're really talking about undocumented asylum seekers. We're not talking so much about skilled immigrants, which that the tech sector uses a lot of that kind of labor. Mm-hmm. But the migrant labor we're talking about is very concentrated in, you said, construction, agriculture, healthcare, elder care, and services like tourism, cleaning staff, all kinds of janitorial services, for instance. So those industries, they are very angry at DeSantis right now in Florida, especially agriculture and construction, because they are losing skilled labor that they have taken time and money to train, that is now looking for possibilities in other states where they won't be scared to drive a car, where they won't be scared to go to work, where they'll be able to go to work and receive benefits or go to a hospital in case of emergency. So all of these policies have economic repercussions, and we're only starting to see the first phase of them.
Let's talk about the national immigration reform policy. Where does it stand right now?
It is completely frozen. It is an issue that the two parties have virtually no overlap on. There are some exceptions. There are, for instance, Republicans like Congressman Dan Newhouse out of Washington, who represents a lot of agricultural interests in the eastern part of that state, for example. He wants to see reform. He wants to see at least farm workers get what other Republicans would call amnesty. Basically, the right to work, the right to live without being deported. And there's industries that just simply depend on this migrant labor. Dairy, for instance, they simply use undocumented immigrants because there are no documented immigrants or Americans who are willing to learn, let alone do the work, learn all that it takes to take care of livestock year round. And there is no visa that even if the system worked, there is no visa that allows for temporary workers to work year-round in a dairy farm, for instance.
Rafael, we only have about a minute left, but I want to talk about just the words that are being thrown around, because they can be explosive. When you talk about undocumented, and there's a large percentage of the population that refers to them as illegal aliens, and there's a big difference. A lot of these people are fleeing conflict or gangs from their countries and want to come to the United States for a better life, and they're doing it the way that it has always been done. Come here and apply for citizenship, and they're used to be allowed to stay in the country while this went on. But what about these terms that are being thrown around now? How explosive are they?
Well, for instance, illegal alien is a legal term. Legal as in statute. That one can go either way. It might simply be very technically accurate, or it can be insulting. But there are other terms. For instance, Governor DeSantis' plan for immigration is called "Stop the Invasion." Obviously, this word "invasion" speaks to some sort of military threat or an actual threat to American society. Those terms are much more dangerous, and they are getting a following. And well, we've seen them. We've seen people who enacted race-based mass killings in El Paso in 2019, for instance, using these terms and following this idea of an invasion and the so-called Great Replacement theory.
Well, with the election season just heating up, I sadly think we're in for a lot more of this. Rafael, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.